Serenity Valley Stories invites you into the shadows. Like and subscribe for more tales that will haunt your nights. And now our feature presentation, The Hunter's Moon. We always thought of the old bear hunting cabin as our secret getaway. Tucked deep within the woods of northern New Mexico, it was the perfect place to escape from everything, to leave behind the stress of school, work, and the monotony of suburban life. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by miles of dense forest, with nothing but the sounds of nature to keep you company. It was our place, our refuge, where we could be ourselves without the pressures of the world bearing down on us. But there were stories about those woods, stories we'd heard as kids, sitting around campfires, stories our parents told us to keep us from wandering too far into the wilderness. Tales of strange creatures, of spirits that could change shape, that could take on the appearance of animals or even people you knew. Skinwalkers, they called them. But we never paid much attention to those stories. They were just legends, after all, scary tales to thrill and frighten, but nothing more. At least, that's what we thought. The trip had been Mike's idea. He'd inherited the cabin from his uncle, who'd been a big-time hunter until he passed away a few years back. Mike and his uncle had been close, and after the funeral, the cabin became ours, a place for Mike, Jason, and me to hang out, to hunt, to drink, and to just be away from everything. This time, we were planning on doing some bear hunting. The season had just opened, and we were eager to get started. The drive up had been uneventful. We left early, just after dawn, and spent most of the day hiking through the woods, checking the old trails, and setting up some bait. The weather was perfect, crisp, cool air, and a sky so clear you could see for miles. We didn't see any bears, but we weren't too concerned. We had the whole weekend, after all, and we were in no rush. That first night, we were just planning on kicking back, drinking a few beers, and enjoying the peace and quiet. The cabin was as we remembered it, rustic, with a single room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a loft above where we slept. There was a small wood stove in the corner, a couple of worn-out chairs, and a table that looked like it had seen better days. The walls were lined with old hunting trophies, bear skins, antlers, and even a few faded photographs of Mike's uncle with his kills. The whole place had a rough, lived-in feel, like it had seen more than its fair share of hard winters and long nights. We settled in quickly, unpacking our gear and getting a fire going in the stove. The sun was already setting by the time we sat down for dinner, just some canned stew and a loaf of bread we'd picked up at the last town we passed through. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from being around people you've known your whole life, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. After dinner, we moved outside to the porch, where we could see the stars starting to come out. The moon was rising, a full, bright orb that cast long shadows across the clearing in front of the cabin. It was beautiful, the kind of night that made you feel alive, that made you forget about all the worries and stress waiting for you back in the real world. But as the night went on, something changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a feeling that something was off. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the wind, seemed to fade away, replaced by an almost oppressive silence. I could feel it in my chest, a tightness, a sense of unease that I couldn't explain. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Jason asked, breaking the silence. "Hear what?" Mike replied, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want to be too loud. "Thought I heard something out there," Jason said, nodding toward the tree line. "Something moving." We all turned our attention to the woods, straining to see or hear whatever it was that had caught Jason's attention. But there was nothing, just the darkness, the shadows cast by the moonlight, and the occasional creak of the old cabin settling. "You're just spooking yourself," Mike said after a moment, trying to sound confident, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Yeah, maybe," Jason muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. We sat there for a while longer, but the mood had changed. The easy camaraderie we'd felt earlier had been replaced by something else, something tense, uneasy. Eventually, we all decided to call it a night. We locked up the cabin, made sure the fire was banked, and headed up to the loft. I don't know how long I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of Jason and Mike breathing beside me, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we weren't alone out here. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, like something was dragging across the wood outside. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and strained to listen. The sound came again, closer this time, almost like it was right outside the cabin. "Did you hear that?" Jason whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," Mike replied, just as quietly. We all lay there in the dark, listening, waiting. The sound came again, moving around the cabin, slow and deliberate, like something was circling us. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and my mouth went dry with fear. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, but no one answered. We heard the sound again, louder now, and then a soft tapping, like something, or someone, was knocking on the walls. It moved around the cabin, tapping first on one side, then another, as if it was trying to find a way in. "Mike, did you lock the door?" Jason asked, his voice shaking. "Yeah, I locked it," Mike replied, but he didn't sound sure. The tapping continued, moving faster now, more insistent. I could hear it on the roof, on the walls, everywhere at once, like we were surrounded. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it a bear? But bears didn't act like this. They didn't knock on doors, didn't play games. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, almost suffocating. We lay there, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I couldn't tell. The fear had twisted my sense of time, made everything feel surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the silence continued, unbroken, and slowly, I began to relax, to convince myself that maybe it was over. That's when we heard the door creak open. It was slow, deliberate, the sound of old hinges protesting as the door swung inward. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, and I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. None of us could. Something was in the cabin with us. We could hear it moving around downstairs, slow, heavy footsteps that seemed to echo through the walls. It didn't sound like a bear, or anything else I could recognize. It was too deliberate, too calculated. It was searching for us. Mike was the first to move. He grabbed the rifle we'd brought along for the hunt and crept toward the ladder leading down to the main room. Jason and I followed, not wanting to be left alone in the loft. Mike reached the bottom of the ladder and peered around the corner, the rifle clutched tightly in his hands. I could see his knuckles turning white, could hear his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "There's nothing there," he whispered, but his voice was thick with fear. We all knew that wasn't true. We could feel it, something was down there with us, something we couldn't see. Suddenly, there was a crash, a loud bang that made us all jump. The door had slammed shut, the force of it rattling the windows. We heard footsteps again, faster this time, moving toward us. "Get up here!" Mike shouted, and we scrambled back up the ladder, nearly tripping over each other in our panic. We huddled together in the loft, our backs pressed against the wall, staring down at the empty room below. The footsteps stopped, and the silence returned, even more oppressive than before. Then, the voice came. "Mike." It was soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was his uncle's voice, the one who'd given him the cabin, the one who'd been dead for years. "Mike, come down here. It's safe." Mike's face went pale, and he shook his head, refusing to believe what he was hearing. But the voice continued, more insistent. "Mike, it's me. Come down here, son." I could see the terror in Mike's eyes, could feel it radiating off of him. He didn't want to believe it, but there was something in that voice, something that made him want to obey. "Don't listen to it," Jason whispered, grabbing Mike's arm. "That's not your uncle." But the voice kept calling, kept pleading, until finally, Mike couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, shaking Jason off, and started down the ladder. "Mike, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. He reached the bottom and stepped into the room, the rifle still clutched in his hands. He was shaking, his eyes wide with fear, but he kept moving forward, drawn by the voice. "Where are you?" he called out, his voice trembling. "I'm here," the voice replied, but it wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding us. Mike turned, trying to find the source, but there was nothing, just shadows and darkness. Then, suddenly, the voice changed. It became deeper, more guttural, almost animalistic. "Come closer, Mike." Mike froze, realizing too late that he'd been tricked. The shadows around him seemed to shift and move, and I could see something dark and twisted, emerging from the corner of the room. "Mike, get out of there!" Jason shouted, but Mike couldn't move. The thing lunged at him, faster than anything I'd ever seen. Mike tried to raise the rifle, but it was too late. The creature was on him in an instant, dragging him down, its shape shifting and writhing as it attacked. Mike screamed, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I wanted to help him, to do something, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Jason grabbed me, pulling me away from the edge of the loft. "We have to go," he said, his voice panicked. "We have to get out of here." I nodded, still shaking, and we climbed out of the loft window, dropping down onto the roof of the cabin. We didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. We just ran. The woods were dark, the moonlight barely breaking through the thick canopy above us. We stumbled over roots and rocks, our breath coming in ragged gasps, but we didn't stop. We could hear it behind us, the sound of footsteps, of something crashing through the underbrush, getting closer and closer. "Keep going!" Jason shouted, but I could hear the fear in his voice, could see the panic in his eyes. We burst out of the trees and into the clearing where we'd parked the truck. Jason fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped them. He finally got the door open, and we scrambled inside, slamming the doors behind us. But the truck wouldn't start. Jason turned the key again and again, but the engine just sputtered and died. Come on, he shouted, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. I could see it now, emerging from the trees, its shape still shifting, still changing, as it moved toward us. It was tall, with long, twisted limbs, and eyes that seemed to glow with a sickly yellow light. It wasn't human, wasn't anything I could recognize. Finally, the truck roared to life, and Jason floored the gas pedal, tearing out of the clearing and down the dirt road. I could see the creature in the rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the trees, watching us as we sped away. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town, hours later. We didn't talk, didn't say a word to each other, too shocked, too terrified to even think. Jason didn't make it through the night. I woke up in the motel room to find him dead, his face frozen in a look of absolute terror. There were no signs of a struggle, no wounds, nothing to explain what had happened to him. He was just gone. I'm the only one left now, the only one who survived that night. I don't know why it let me go, why it didn't finish the job. But I can feel it, even now, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before it comes back for me. Thank you for watching Serenity Valley Stories. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another scary tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below.